It's finally time to build you guys the ultimate 1440p gaming PC for 2015.
Tech Yes City style, baby.
Component selection is easily the most important part in building a new gaming PC. I don't know how many times I've seen people put in really high-end graphics cards with bad CPUs or vice versa, and the end result is something that won't perform as well as something that would have otherwise costed a lot less money. So today we're going with the build that, although is a little bit expensive in face value, and the initial cost will be a little bit expensive, everything here just synergizes really well to make a great gaming PC as well as double down as a great workstation PC. So I'll quickly go through the component selection and why I'm picking what I'm picking in today's build, and then we'll get on to the installation. So first up here we have the motherboard. This is the B85 Progamer from Asus. Now, if you can't get this motherboard in your country, there is an alternative that I will recommend, and that is the ASRock Fatality Killer. B85 as well. Both should be had for around about the same price, and they should offer similar features as one another. However, let's get back to this motherboard and the 4 things that I really like about it. The first thing, VRM, 8+ 2-phase power design with great components in that VRM as well. This will mean a solid power delivery for your CPU and other components, as well as great power savings as well. And it'll help keep the motherboard cool as well. Second thing I like about this motherboard, it has the Supreme FX audio chipset on board. Now, the audio out on this motherboard is phenomenal, especially for a board that comes under $100. The mic in and the line in are okay, but the audio out is phenomenal, which is what counts, especially for a gamer. Now, the third thing I like about this board is it uses the Intel i217V NIC, which is great for games, great for transferring files across networks as well. And then there's a fourth thing. All this comes under $100. Win. So for the CPU, we're going with an interesting choice, and that is the Xeon 1231V3. This is actually the Haswell Refresh edition of the Xeon CPUs for the LGA 1155 socket, and this comes clocked in at 3.4 gigs base, though it has a turbo clock that enables it to go up to 3.8 gigs. And now with that previous motherboard that I mentioned, the B85 Progamer, you can get this thing to 3.8 gigs on all cores if you use the right BIOS revision. So essentially we've got a CPU that can go up to 3.8 gigs on a B85 chipset, and it comes in at around about $250. Now, another great thing about this CPU is that it's got hyperthreading as well. So when we're doing those workstation applications, we can take advantage of that hyperthreading, especially when we're rendering a video, for example. We can make rendering times a lot faster by utilizing hyperthreading as opposed to just a 4-core without hyperthreading. Now, another benefit of this CPU is that it uses a better fan than the normal desktop i7 and i5 editions of the Intel coolers. So it has the same cooler, though it uses a better fan. And so this fan's going to be a little bit more quiet, and it's going to be a little bit more powerful than the cheaper variants that they use on the desktop series of their chips. Now for the graphics card, another crucial point for a gaming PC, and today we're going with a GTX970 from NVIDIA. Any GTX970 will be really good for gaming at 1440p. This is the G1 Gaming Edition from Gigabyte, and it is an absolute beast at 1440p. I haven't had any problems on any games that I've played with this thing. Now, there's recently been a fiasco where effectively this card really only uses 3.5 gigabytes of its VRAM, and as much as I don't agree with the way NVIDIA marketed it, it still is a great card for the money. So any variant of this graphics card will be great for gaming at 1440p. So next up, we've got the power supply. This is the Animax Revolution XT, 630 watt gold rated power supply. Now this is overkill for this build, however it was the cheapest power supply that I could get with the features that I wanted. I wanted black sleeve cabling to make the build look sleek. I also wanted a gold rated power supply to bring down efficiency. I also wanted decent parameters in there like low ripple suppression and solid voltage regulation, and this power supply certainly delivers in that regards. Now there are many other vendors out there. Ones that come to mind are Seasonic, Superflower, Corsair, I'm sure that Antec. There's a lot of other great power supply makers out there. However, I do recommend going with at least 500 watts for this build. I know if you get a solid 450 watt power supply, that will be fine as well. Something like a Rosewill Capstone as well. That'll be fine for the job today. However, I'm going with a 630 watt gold rated power supply, and it does absolutely fine for the build today. So for storage today, we're going with the 256 gigabyte MX100 from Crucial. There are newer variants of this out. There's the more faster MX200, which will give you even better speeds than this. Just keep in mind though, when you buy an SSD from Crucial, it's pretty much going to be guaranteed great value for money. Again, great value for money. Western Digital Blue, 1 terabyte. This thing is solid, it's fast. You'll be able to put all those games that you don't really play on this drive, as well as using it for a temporary drive to capture gameplay with things like shadow play or capture temporary recordings on your desktop. So great drive. So for memory, we're going with some DDR3 memory from any reputable manufacturer. And the reason why it's not such a big deal is because the B85 has a speed limit on the memory of 1600 megahertz. And so you can't get any higher than this. So buying super fancy RAM will not give you any benefits on this in today's build. So for peripherals, we're going with a little bit of a mix. This is my recommendation, and this is what I use personally. Headphones, we've got the Fidelio L1s. I absolutely love these things, especially if you go on the internet. You can get a cheap female to female adapter, and then you can get a V-Motor Boom Pro, and you've got yourself one awesome gaming headset with amazing sound quality for around about $150. So next up, we've got the mouse. This is the G302 from Logitech. This thing is great. That's all I can say. Great sensor, great response times, great build quality, except the price isn't so great. It's $50, so it is a little bit expensive, but I'm telling you, it's my new favorite mouse, and I absolutely love this mouse. So next up for the keyboard, we've got a Cherry MX mechanical keyboard. I love to use a Cherry MX blue personally, even though this is a Cherry MX red. So go try the keyboards. I've got a mechanical keyboards buyer's guide that you guys can check out. Choose the right keyboard for you. Though keep in mind that this is an expensive keyboard, though it is a luxury that I do recommend to people if they're serious about PC gaming, or they're serious about doing work in front of their computer and not getting wrist strain, for example, especially with a Cherry MX Blue. Cases. Today we're going with the iVector from Enimax. This is a great case for the money. It's got a clear acrylic side window. It's also got a switch on there, which you can mod, and which I did mod, to put in LED lights and switch it to low noise, low settings, or even switch the fans off completely. Great case, great room to work with, and very easy, and makes a lot of things make sense in this case. Though you don't have to go with this case. You can go with something like I've got sitting around here, a Fractal Define R4. Very solid case, could probably survive a nuclear holocaust. So the parts list wouldn't be complete without a monitor. So in the background here, I have a Yamakasi from eBay which costs about $300 delivered to your door. And these are 1440p IPS displays. They're absolutely gorgeous. You've got a lot of real estate there on your screen. Though if you don't want to get something shipped from Korea and you want to get something domestically, then I'd say hold out for a little bit, because later this month, Acer have a 1440p 144 Hz, both TN and IPS panels hitting the market. They will be a bit more expensive than this, though they will be great, especially for gaming. So now it's time to build this bad boy, and before we do, we can just quickly go ground ourselves by touching a grounding point, or just go touch a car outside. That'll generally do the trick. You don't have to go waste money on an anti-static builder's wristband or some overpriced anti-static builder's mat. I mean, I've built countless computers on the carpet for what it's worth. So anyway, let's move on to this build. We'll go through a quick run through of what I did. So I generally like to install the CPU or the memory first. It doesn't make a big difference unless you have a big air cooler. And if you have a big air cooler, then you'll generally want to install the memory first, just to make sure that it clears the memory, especially if it's got high profile heat sinks, as well as being a lot easier to install it first up, especially if you can't get in there later once the cooler covers the RAM slots. But in this case, we've got an Intel heatsink fan that doesn't even go near the RAM slots, so I decided to install that first. After I've done this, I put some heatsink paste on the die. Either the spread method or the P method is absolutely fine, though I will say that I do take a slight preference to the spread method, especially in high performance applications. Though after that, we just be very careful here and we install the RAM and just firmly press on the edges of the RAM to get that in, and just take your time with this. Like seriously, just you don't have to force anything in, just firmly press everything in, and if you can't press it in, then just have a break or ask someone else to try it for you. Though I do have a full uncut how to build your first PC guide, and I'll put a link in the description below for that. Though there are some other great guides out there from other YouTubers, so be sure to check that out, especially if it's your first time building a PC. If it's not your first time building a PC, or if it's second or third or whatever, then it's most likely going to be a walk in the park. Though after we've done that, we can then start to screw the motherboard into the case, and I do generally prefer a magnetic tip screwdriver. And out of my whole PC building experience, this is one thing that I will strongly recommend, is a magnetic tip screwdriver. If you have a normal screwdriver and you drop screws, man, it can take some time, it can waste time. So I highly recommend getting a magnetic tip screwdriver if you are installing PC components, especially, screwing things down. Anyway, let's get back to the build here. So after you've screwed down your motherboard and everything's all good, you can then install your graphics card in the PCI Express slot. That's if you're using a dedicated graphics card. And then after that, you can install the SATA drives in the SATA drive bays to the side there, as well as a DVD drive if you are going to install a DVD drive. After that, you can then install your power supply and get all your cables ready and start to route things up. Though I generally like to install my SATA cables first before the power supply cables, and I like to install the front input-output connectors as well before I do power supply cables, as the power supply cables are the absolute last thing that I do, as well as cable management, because with cable management I generally like to zip tie everything off, and after that I don't want to come back to it ever again. So as you can see here, this is actually a non-modular power supply that we used here. It was a 650 watt and there was a lot of spare cables. The fact that it fitted in this case was actually a testament to the Animax iVector and how much room they do give you here at the back for cable management. So here you can see here, this is the final step in the build. Once you've got everything ready, you've got all your drive bays installed, you can then start routing your cables and generally making everything clean, making sure all the airflow will not be obstructed. So after cable management, we can then start to put the side panels back on and get everything ready for our first boot. That's all those juicy peripherals. So once we've done that, we can connect all the devices that we need to connect and get it ready for its first boot. And as you can see here, it's booting up perfectly fine. We can then go into the BIOS and get things ready for our first boot. So now it's in time to install the OS, and I want you guys to get a program called Yumi. That's if you're going to make a USB bootable pen drive, and I'll put the link in the description below for it. But once we've done this, we can get our ISO ready on the desktop right next to Yumi, open up Yumi, and then put our pen drive into the computer, and then Yumi will recognize it. And I do recommend formatting it to a FAT32 partition if you can. It will make life a lot easier. But once we've got all that ready, we can then select the ISO, which is right on the desktop here, and then we can click next. And with just a few clicks, Yumi will get us a USB bootable pen drive ready. So this program saves a lot of time. It's a great program for making USB bootable pen drives. So let's get on to the next step, and that's to insert your USB pen drive into the fresh computer. and then press the power button, and then repeatedly press F8 until you get that boot menu up. And once you get that boot menu up, you can then select the USB pen drive from the drop-down options. So as we can see here, it's appeared here. That would be my I/O data USB pen drive. And then you'll see the Yumi come up here, the Yumi multi-boot USB UI. You can then select your bootable ISO there from the Windows 7, 8 option. And then you can click Install Windows 8. As we can see here, it's recognized it, and we're good to go. So after this step, after you've installed Windows 8 on your desktop, you can then start to tune your OS and get it ready to your liking. And at this stage, I do recommend, especially if it's your first computer, running your components in for a good week just to make sure none of the default settings are causing any problems or you don't have any hardware malfunctions. Though after our hardware's all good and everything's good and we've customized our OS, we can then move on to the next stage, and that is overclocking and finding all the settings right for you. Now, if you're building this exact computer, feel free to copy my settings, and I will put them in the description below, all the settings that I've used today in this video, and I will be making a undervolters guide as well for the Xeon, so stay tuned for that. Though once everything is fully tuned, we can then move on to the next stage, and that is the benchmarks. So here we are at the finished product, and this is what I decided to call it, TUA, or the underappreciated, as I believe it is just that. It's underappreciated in today's market where everyone's off focusing on fancy fish cool tank PCs, or they're off focusing on fancy water cooling PCs. And I believe something like this that's just simple, doesn't cost a lot to build, and is elegant, doesn't get enough appreciation. Hence the name. So something about this PC and something in regards to this case directly is that you can turn the LED lights and the fans off, or you can just turn the fans on in silent mode with the LEDs off. So I'll be doing a follow-up video showing you or telling you guys exactly what I did in terms of modding this case past just putting the parts in normally. And also I'll be answering more questions for you guys in the comments in a follow-up video. So if you have any questions about this rig or about the whole setup, then put a comment in the comment section below and I'll be following up for you guys. So let's move on now to some benchmarks where we can see how well this thing performs in games, also productivity tasks, and some synthetic benchmarks as well. So all those figures you saw in the benchmarks, this was attained with power consumption that was just a little bit over 300 watts. Absolutely fantastic efficiency there. So this will mean that you'll be saving money on the power bill, especially when you compare it to more power hungry rigs. So how do we get these power consumption figures, or these low power consumption figures? We're using the B85 chipset. That's another advantage of using that motherboard. We've also got the Xeon undervolted to 0.99 volts. We've also got the DDR3 undervolted. So we've tweaked the settings, and then we're using the GTX970, which is one of the most efficient GPUs for the watts out there. So this just makes not only a great value for money build in terms of the end results, it also makes a great build in terms of efficiency. So if you guys like this build, I've put links in the description below for the US, the UK, and Australia as well. So feel free to mix and match the components that you like and get the best build for you. Though keep in mind, this thing will do a great job on saving power on the power bill. It'll do a great job of giving you high-end, high gameplay footage at 1440p. It'll also do a great job at workstation tasks if you're into editing videos, or if you're into doing special effects or things like that. So anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Tech Yes City, where I'll be coming back to you guys today with some more tech vids in the future. Sorry, this video took me a long time to do, and I was kind of just battling with some real tough illnesses over the last month. So anyway, I'm back in the game. Make sure if you ask those questions if you have them, because I'll be talking about this build a little bit more in depth and in another follow-up video. So anyway guys, I'll catch you in another video. Bye.